Welcome. I'm sure this is not your first session of ISSoTL 2021, but welcome to this particular session. Galvanizing SoTL with diversity and inclusion within ISSoTL. And there's a number of members of the ISSoTL Advocacy Committee here leading this particular panel. And with that, I was going to transition to Hillary, but she's not quite back in. So Diana, would you like to speak and kick it off and pass it along to Earl or whomever?
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to do that. Thank you very much, Mary Ann. It's great to be here with everyone. We are members of the Advocacy Committee, and we are very excited to be presenting this session today. We have Earl and Miles, I'm Diana, and Hillary, and we'll be coming back in, we hope soon, and then Michelle. And she's not joining us today because it's 2:30 in the morning, her time. So Earl, without too much further ado, you want to go ahead and get us started? Oh, I needed to tell you how we were going to do this. We actually videotaped the first part of our session to give you some context. And then we'll come back and we'll take some questions live, and we'll all be here to kind of go through the questions with you.
Great. Thank you all and welcome, and I'll press play so you can watch that.
By to our panel today that's called Galvanizing SoTL with Diversity and Inclusion. My name is Associate Professor Michelle Eady. I'm coming to you from Australia, from the east coast of Australia, about an hour south of Sydney. And I come to you from Dharawal country. And in Australia, before we start a presentation, we always acknowledge the custodians of the land that we're on today. So I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and all elders past, present, and emerging. I want to say that I respect the land and the animals and the waterways from the roots of the earth to the top of the trees, and would like to thank all the elders before us who've given us the opportunity to learn and grow on this land. We try our best to protect it, and we understand that if we look after country, country will look after us. So today, at some point during the busyness of the conference, if you can take a moment to just take a look outside and appreciate something that's in nature that catches your eye, and just say, a little thanks for the beautiful land that we have to meet on. And even though we can't all be together in person this year, just be thankful that we do have a place that we can meet. Today's discussion around galvanizing SoTL with diversity and inclusion is talking about our personal experiences from individual, institutional, and international perspectives about strategies for promoting SoTL with a goal of increasing diversity within the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and increasing the prominence of the SoTL work that we do in various contexts through the lens of leadership and advocacy. So I'd just like to take a moment to introduce you to the panel members today, and to let you know what the plan is for our presentation so that you know what to expect. So as I said, I'm Michelle Eady. I'm a senior fellow with the HGA, and I also am a fellow of ISSoTL in Australia. I right now sit as the vice president of SoTL Asia Pacific region. Then we have Associate Professor Earl Abramson. Maybe you can just give a little wave. Earl's at the University of East London. He's an associate professor and program leader for sports therapy, and he is the founding co-editor of the Journal of Impact Cultures and the Circle Research Group. Welcome, Earl. Then we have Professor Kelly. Mills is the director at Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University in Virginia, and was SoTL president from 2018 to 19. Welcome, Mills. Professor Hillary Steiner is the Associate Director of SoTL at the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. She's a professor in psychology at at Kennesaw State University in Georgia, and is currently the Vice President of the United States ISSoTL group. Welcome, Hillary. Professor Diana Gregory is also at Kennesaw State in Georgia, and she is an active, long-time and valued member of the ISSoTL Advocacy Committee and a professor of art education at Kennesaw State. Welcome, Diana. It's so amazing to have such a well-known and esteemed panel chatting with us today. So I'm just going to stop the sharing for a second so that we can see our panel members. What we decided to do today, because our time zones are so varied, we thought that we would record a little bit of this presentation so that we can all start the conversation and be awake and together with you. And then we'll stop the recording, and there'll be some folks who are live there at the session from this panel who will continue the discussion with you on this topic, and to answer any questions that you might have, and to hear some input that you might like to add to this discussion moving forward. So we're going to start with a few questions and the panel answering those questions. And so I'll just start with the first question. I guess the way to begin this, perhaps, Mills, is to find out where this idea came from, to understand how inclusive ISSoTL is for equity-seeking students and staff, and to be able to grasp where the conversation began and how this all started. So maybe I'll start with you, Mills, if that's okay.
Sure, that's great. Thanks so much, Michelle. I think it's important to understand that I come from probably the most diverse, or one of the most diverse, large research universities in North America, or at least in the United States, and we have no majority on our campus, and we count diversity in every way, and inclusion in every way that you can possibly imagine that term. So you can slice it up in lots of different ways, and we are diverse in all of those different ways that you can imagine. And so, as one of the founding members of ISSoTL way back when I joined the board of the organization as the president-elect, one of the things that I started reflecting on was how diverse and how inclusive is our organization. And what I noticed, and what a number of us had already noticed, it wasn't new to me, is that ISSoTL so this was 2017, that ISSoTL is really, frankly, a pretty white group of people. And conversations that I had with members of the ISSoTL board and with other members who I know and have known for many years, one of the things that became really clear was that the beliefs and the values and the commitments of the members didn't match the results on the ground. That when you talk to members of the organization, these are people who have a very, very strong commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion, and yet that didn't show up in the membership of the organization. And so it was that disconnect that formed the basis of the conversation that we began having in the ISSoTL board in 2017, and ultimately resulted in the adoption of the new strategic plan for the organization in 2019, that made specific commitments around diversity, equity, and inclusion that resulted from that conversation. And it was really a 2-year conversation that we had. And so that's really kind of how this all got started. And I will also mention that in the middle of our conversations as a board, I think it was at the Calgary conference, that a presenter who was presenting at one of the plenary sessions, who he was not white, looked out at the crowd and said, kind of chuckled and said, I have to say, ISSoTL, I love coming to these conferences, but ISSoTL meetings are about the whitest place that I go. And that just reinforced for us the work that we were already doing and how important that work was. So that's kind of how it all got started.
Great, thank you. And was anyone else at that plenary, or anyone else from the panel have any comments to make around those early days of these discussions? Diana?
Hi everyone. I was at the Calgary conference, and I was really struck by that comment that was made, and it was, I think, it was like lightning going through the group, because it really did sort of bring to the forefront many of the discussions and thoughts that were kind of stirring around at that moment.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Earl?
Well, the first event that I went as a scholar, I suppose, the paper I spoke about is Why Do Students Call Us Sir? And that opened up a whole raft around inclusive. What does inclusive mean, and how do you address a person in power, I suppose? And that really brought home that possibly those who were part of that space had a powerful presence. And I think that this issue will be addressed in multiple ways through multiple angles. And this is an ongoing challenge, I think, that ISSOTL will be working with for many years ahead.
Great, thank you. So when we take a look at the next question, which is basically, how does that happen? Who shapes the discourses of SoTL? And how do they do that? And why does that happen? So maybe I'll start with you, Earl, if that's okay. How do you see that happening, and what is going on in the institutions that results in, what we've seen in the past in our society?
Thank you. And that's a really key question. I think for me, it's really around the 3 Ps: the people, the purpose, and the power. In other words, when I attend these events, ISSOTL events, I really enjoy it because I feel like I'm coming home and speaking with colleagues. I'm part of a bigger group. But at the same time, I listen to the words of colleagues who I've worked with, for example, Peter Felton and Gary Bull. And one of their key messages that they talk about is who gets to do SoTL and who gets SoTL done to them. And it's that balance, I suppose, of power. So who gets to shape SoTL is one question, but who gets to share SoTL is a different part of that. And I think it starts with the person, and it's about how valued and valuable is SoTL in the higher ed landscape. And especially now in the UMK, SoTL is a foreign word, alien in many ways. And it's winning over the trust and showing how through SoTL we can engage in change. And it's not about doing things better, as we've spoken about many times, just improving. It's about doing better things now. And I think who gets to shape SoTL is really about how SoTL could be used to transform the way we think, because it transcends the classroom. It's a shared culture, but it's about who is involved in that. And I think it starts from a micro level and weaves its way out into a macro and meso as well. And there's been a lot of work around that, the ripple effect of SoTL. So I suppose it's a personal journey of who gets to shape it and who would we like to have it shaped, or how would we like to have it shaped in future, are probably some of the questions we would like to address moving forward.
Great, thank you so much, Earl. And Hillary, I might turn that over to you. We haven't heard from you yet this afternoon. I know you've been a very busy lady running your SoTL Summit and things happening in your world. To just continue from what Earl's saying, how are our current practices privileging and amplifying particular voices and perhaps excluding other voices when we're talking about this topic?
Yeah, so we were conference hosts in 2019, Kennesaw State, and we took as our theme SoTL Without Borders. And so we were very intentional about thinking about all the different borders, and
That was in the tape. It's okay.
how we could smash them. And how we could make sure that people who were not necessarily included before were included now, and how can we make sure that lines were blurred so that people felt like their methodologies were respected. Others who were not always getting heard. So we thought a lot about this, and we ultimately invited Kasturi Bahari Leak to be our keynote speaker, one of our keynote speakers, and she was not a SoTL person, as she would say, and she even questioned whether or not she had a place at ISSOTL, because she was not a member of the SoTL community necessarily, although she was an extremely accomplished member of the higher education community. But we knew that her experience in higher education in South Africa would really give her a lot to say to the SoTL community about smashing borders and about making sure that voices were heard. And sure enough, her keynote was very well received, as was her follow-up paper in teaching and learning inquiry. So yes, we've just finished hosting our own SoTL conference here at KSU, and I tried to carry this sentiment into the work there. I wanted to give an outlet for people who might not be quite ready for SoTL, but wanted to learn more about SoTL. So we invited our KSU graduate students to come to the SoTL Summit for free, and followed up with them to invite them to come to other workshops on SoTL and to learn more about it. And then we also had a session type called an innovative teaching talk, where people could share good teaching ideas that they'd like to turn into a SoTL project that might not quite be ready for. And so they were able to get feedback from attendees on how they might do so. And doing it in this way as sort of a developmental experience was really well received. I had a lot of people come up to me and say, you know, I, as such a novice in SoTL, I never felt like there was a place for me there. And I was given a voice, and I feel like this is something I could do. And so I was really happy with that. And I think inviting people in that maybe not traditional parts of the SoTL crowd, but would like to be and would like to learn more is one way that we can really do that, and let them contribute to the SoTL conversation while also learning from those around them.
Those are some great examples, and how thrilled would the students have been to be invited for free to something. I know that my students would have loved that. Fantastic. And Diana, you've done some work with Nicholas Simmons and Lauren Scharf around non-tenure track academics in this space. Did you maybe want to follow up with that one?
I did. Thank you very much. It was really at the conference in Calgary that we brought up this notion and this idea of what happens to SoTL work if your institution isn't really there to support you. What if you're a non-tenured faculty member? How do you really participate in the SoTL work if you're sort of feeling non-supported? And so we did kind of a case study of that. And what we really found was that a lot of people want to do work, and then there was sort of a disconnect. And that's really interesting to me, in the fact that, I think that I'm really interested in how institutions look at SoTL work and whether or not they're willing to really sort of buy in to that type of scholarship or not. And we heard a lot about whether SoTL was included on tenure and promotion. There was a lot of issues that sort of came up in that discussion. So I think that we were really, really struck by the fact that, what voices are we including in this conversation, and how does that inclusion look? How does it work? And then if we are going to amplify it, how do we, in this committee, in the Advocacy Committee for SoTL, for ISSOTL, how do we actually sort of put the boots on the ground and really get that moving forward? What are the things that we need to do?
Right. I think some of the work that I have done in working with Indigenous communities, both in Canada and in Australia, we have an Indigenous center on campus here called Wolyanga Indigenous Center. And speaking with the teachers and the tutors and the people who are working in that center about the different pedagogies that they apply that are of Indigenous knowledges and 8 ways of learning and those sorts of things, and how we can apply them in the university setting, in the research that we do, having sharing circles, having yarns, as they call them here, discussions with elders being included has been one of those pieces that I've really tried to work on in my SoTL work, kind of opening the doors to welcoming different cultural perspectives on how we teach and learn and why that's important is something that I've done here. So I hear everything that you're saying, Diana, and I might have worked on that paper with you, so I might know a little bit about that too. So Mills, here are some really great examples of folks on the panel who are starting to foster equality, diversity. More ideas from you, Mills. What's more that we can do in our institutions at, maybe on an individual, kind of a micro, meso, and macro level moving forward?
And I think for me, I want to amplify something that Hillary said, and that's about, and each of you sort of touched on, and that is being open to other forms of scholarship, because there's this tension in the SoTL community, and that is, on the one hand, wanting to be accepted as real scholars and doing real scholarship in an area that is still not widely accepted in universities in the, at least certainly in the North American and European and possibly Australian, New Zealand world. But, and so there's this pressure to have our scholarship look like real scholarship. We have the right kinds of citations and the right review of the literature and all of those things that make it look like real scholarship. And what that does is it excludes other ways of knowing. And so whether they're indigenous ways of knowing or, what does queer SoTL look like? And I think that's a really interesting question to imagine. And so I work in the digital humanities, and we have a very active conversation about what is Black DH. And we have some really bright young scholars working and saying, we don't say it in the same ways as the dominant narrative of digital humanities. And so as an organization or as a community, we have to really be open to the fact that other people think about and present knowledge in ways that don't fit with the sort of traditional scholarship that we've developed in SoTL. So that's at the community level. At the institutional level, then I think we have to reflect that down, all the way down into our student population, and say to the students who Hillary was talking about, saying, that was cool, I could do that. Say, okay, let's talk about how you would do that. Not how it's done, but how you might want to do that. And I think if we approach this work by engaging students and graduate students, even undergraduate students, with that question, how would you do that? Then we open the door to many possibilities that I think will lead us in some really interesting directions.
Yeah, fantastic. And Earl, I'm going to go to you and ask you about how SoTL can provide support for faculty who are immersed in SoTL projects focused on diversity and inclusion. What role do you see our society playing in helping academics and others that are working at universities have the resources to be able to ask students those questions? But how would you do that? Let's talk about that more. What would you say is our role as ISSOTL in that?
I think starting out and just picking up on what Mills said, often we talk about that I speak SoTL, I talk SoTL. We had a little badge to say that we speak SoTL, but what does that actually mean on the ground? Using the SoTL words, really important. And I talk about sowing the SoTL seeds. So how do we harvest them? How do we ensure that everyone grows with it and not against it? And it brings me back to those wonderful words when Joe Biden was sworn in, and the poet spoke and said, don't think about what lies between us, think about what lies in front of us. And I think it's about that. It's about how we become one in SoTL. And it's about slowly bringing it in. And what we need to do is set up very carefully a community of practice, co-create the space, have the active voices that we've been speaking about. Let students and faculty and extra staff or support staff all be part of the SoTL world, and thinking about how we learn with and from, and that we don't impose it. But a lot of my colleagues are doing it, but they don't know it. And it's about how do we make SoTL a visibility in terms of this is what we do, And this is why we're proud of what it is we actually do. I think we need to be doing more and probably being able to be including more, as opposed to using a language that very few know what it is we am speaking about. So I think for me, or what we could do, make SoTL open and allow others to access this world so that we grow as one.
Thank you so much, Earl. Hillary, I see you shaking your head with that. Do you have anything to add?
I think Earl said it beautifully, and I was going to touch on what Nils said earlier too. It made me think of the idea of SoTL as public scholarship and how that is going to invite more people in. I love that Teaching and Learning Inquiry, for example, has poetry from time to time, and very interesting ways that are non-traditional in the SoTL world of expressing SoTL. And I think speaking that language is going to mean something very different as we move forward in the field.
I agree. I on a personal note, and this is just an aside of it, but I've been doing a project where we're using art to express who we are and what we know about ourselves. And I think maybe this is the second or third time that I put in a proposal for our conference. And it's not quite getting over the line. And I'm not sure if that's just because it's completely different to what we're used to and the ways that we're doing it. Because I do get other things accepted, but I always wonder if maybe there's something there around art. And Diana, that's a specialty of your area, isn't it? Do you have anything to add there, Diana?
Well, it's true. And, I think that I kind of identify as an artographer. I use a very different research methodology. And when I was first actually coming to conferences and, wanting to be included in sort of the ISSOTL conversations, I really did feel, though, that I had found a group of people who were open to my very different ways of thinking, and who, when I presented things, if it was a Wordle or if it was something that was, very sort of not the traditional academic sort of thing, that people were very much interested in saying, yeah, let's look at that. So the group itself, I think, I want to just amplify, what I think is really good about one of the aspects that's really good is that openness to new experience and the ability of a lot of people I meet within the society to kind of be willing to do that sort of thing. So I think that's one of the things, on a personal note, that is really one of the things that has attracted me to being involved as long as I have.
Yeah, I have had the great pleasure of working with a lot of academics over the past couple of years through SoTL and our ICWG and through CEL at Elon University as well. And one of my colleagues there was talking about a journal that she has just had accepted, an article, and it's all about bullet journaling. And the whole article has been written as a bullet journal. So it looks like pages out of the journal with all the writing, and you can read it, and then there's the little pictures that she's drawn, and that's all been accepted in a proper journal, as a proper journal article. So I think thinking about moving forward for our publications, the way that we present our information through ISSOTL is also important. And Hillary, really excited that you mentioned the new book that's coming out around looking at things that are more public scholarship by Nancy Chick and Jen Freiberg that's coming out very soon. It'll be really interesting to see their thoughts about making our organization a more public one, and maybe expanding that community of practice to kind of be public practice instead of a community of practice moving forward. This is so interesting. I'm having such a lovely time. Are there specific ways and specific tools that you think that we could leverage to share what is known about the big tent of SoTL work moving forward? Diana, can I ask you to start with that question?
I think one of the first times that I heard this idea of the big tent this was the idea that there were many different methodologies that were accepted. There were many different ways of looking at things. Miles, I think you're right. It's a great, lively discussion that is often had about, how things are presented and what's going on. But it is so wonderful to actually see that presence of that thought, that there's a big umbrella and we all fit underneath it. And that we can, in that idea of the big tent, what is it that we bring? I think the best thing that we bring is our diversity and how our different perspectives then really support each other.
Yes, I agree. And I've always said about the society, I've been to many, many conferences in my career before I ever came upon a SoTL conference. And walking into ISSOTL the first time, just the buzz and the way that people were and how they greeted you and how you were accepted, I thought, oh, well, this is where you've all been. I don't know where you've all been my whole life, but thank goodness I found you now. And I think that there's a lot more people that will feel that way as they come to our society if we continue to build this kind of open arms movement forward and ensuring that we're reaching out to everyone. Mills, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I feel the same way. And at the same time, I'm going to disagree a little bit and say that, I think as long as we're an English-only organization, that we are severely limiting our possibilities under that big tent. In other words, it's a big tent, but it's an English-only big tent. And so I think that that's really a problem for us. I was at ISSoTL in Bilbao a couple of years ago, and the folks from South America and Latin America who were there to found ISSOTL were so excited to be there. They had, 35 or 40 people who were there from all across Latin America, and they founded their organization at that meeting. But it was a bilingual meeting. Actually, it was a trilingual meeting because it was English, Spanish, and Basque, and so and they made it work just fine. And we've over the years been, as an organization, I think, been a little resistant about having multiple language tracks within the society and at our conferences and in our journals. And okay, I sit on the editorial board of an international digital journal that has 8 languages. And the cost of translation that imposes just to translate the abstracts of people's papers we translate everything into English, French, Spanish, and English, French, and German because it's based in Switzerland. Just that alone is expensive in terms of overhead. But if we're going to be serious about improving our diversity and inclusion, then we have to be serious about that as well and say, there are huge parts of the planet that don't speak English. And in fact, the vast majority of the population of the world doesn't speak English. And so as an organization, we have to move toward multilingual tracks in our conference, which is our signature event, but in our smaller conferences and regional conferences, et cetera, and also in the journals, and so that we publish, and I think that's just really critical.
I agree. I was at a conference this weekend presenting in Japan, and it was a SoTL conference at a Japanese university. Myself and Juan Moon and Colin Jevons presented, and there were 3 Japanese interpreters that were all taking turns, and as we were presenting, everything was being translated right away on the conference system so that everyone could understand each other and what was happening. And it did make me think, wow, wouldn't this be really interesting to have this, at our conferences, at ISSOTL conferences, and having, some instant translation that's happening. And I think, well, when we're moving in the way that we are in digital technology, maybe we're at a point pretty soon where it won't be such an expensive feat to have some of those things translated, instantaneously and for maybe less cost. We can hope that might happen moving forward. Hillary, did you have anything to add there?
Sorry, I had a glitch really quick. No, I was thinking in terms of, actually, it's funny that you mentioned the tracks for the conferences, because someone approached me about our own SoTL Summit and whether we might have a Spanish-speaking track next year. And that's something I would absolutely love to do and invite people to be a part of. There were several people in the session where this was mentioned that agreed that that would be something that could really draw a group that was not, whose voices were not being amplified, as we've been talking about this whole time. So I think that's a fantastic idea.
So do I. Diana, go ahead.
Oh no, I just totally, I also sit on the diversity, President's Diversity Commission here at Kennesaw. And so there's a whole aspect of diversity too that also is accessible. How accessible are we? And I like that, I think that opening it, my eyes are constantly being open to how the word diversity has to also keep getting broader and broader. It just made me think of that.
I think too, when you were talking, Mills and Hillary, that there's an onus then on us as the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning to be the role models for making this happen. And I think that that's a really important step forward for us to consider and for the board to consider moving forward is how do we exemplify what it is that we're talking about and ensure that it's happening and that we set an example for others to follow. So the last question in the panel is looking on ways we can leverage and build on our current commitment to doing this, on our collective wisdom that we have in this amazing society to provide a basis for reaching a more inclusive and diverse ISSOTL society moving forward. We've spoken a little bit about language. We've talked a little bit about indigeneity, about using different modes of producing our knowledge and having them accepted. Is there anything else that the panel would like to add at this point around this piece, or anything else that you would like to add before we move on? Go ahead, Earl.
Just wanted to say, one of the events I went to, possibly the most impactful that I have seen, wasn't the spoken word of SoTL, but how a scribe and an artist had actually created a mind map during the main speech and had mapped out in vision what is being said. And that to me captured not only the meaning, but the metric of SoTL and how we need to rethink how we want to assess the impact, value and reach of SoTL moving forward. And that was exciting. So maybe the journals of the future have a mind map to actually explain the journey that the author has taken in creating and compiling the work. And that may be the person behind the paper, which is the true story of SoTL.
I think moving forward with our international collaborative writing groups, and the next group that will be working together next year at our conference will be a public SoTL topic. It'll be very interesting to see what those groups come up with and what they present in the different modes and groups of people that we can reach through those modes. So I'll come around for one last comment from each of you. Diana, did you have anything to add?
I do want to say, I think one of the things that really is the best for me is the camaraderie and the challenge. I love it when Miles says, I want to disagree. And I love that. I think that's one of the best things about my experience with the work that I really started, when I was one of the creativity fellows at KSU, and I was introduced to the idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning. But I love just that the way that the dialogues go, and I really want to encourage people to join the dialogue.
Great, thank you. Hillary.
Yeah, kind of building on that, I think as we invite new people in, it's helpful for us all to remember and for us to communicate to new people that SoTL for most of us is a step out of our comfort zone. It is most people have a disciplinary line of research in addition to their SoTL research, even those of us who've been around a long time in the SoTL world. And so we bring with us our disciplinary leanings, our paradigms, our methodologies, and that is valued and important. And so since we're all sort of stepping out of our comfort zone when we do SoTL, it's okay to be a novice, and it's okay to have unusual methodologies. And I think that is something that ISSoTL does really well is welcome people and make us feel comfortable when we go to conferences. And I hope that continues. I hope other people feel that, and I hope they feel personally welcomed as individuals.
Great, thank you so much. So Mills, we started with you at the first word, and now we're coming to you for the last word. How would you like to wrap this up, Mills?
Well, I think what everybody just said about the welcoming nature of the society is really important and gives us a place to start. But I also think that we have to be very intentional about creating clear pathways for success in SoTL for a wide variety of people with a wide variety of ways of thinking and ways of knowing. And we have to invest in those pathways of success. And that means assigning members of the board, members of our committees, members of irrespective people in the SoTL community to actually working with people to mentor them and show them and help them find ways to be successful doing this work. And then once we have more successful examples, we have successful examples, but we need a lot more successful examples. And when those pathways are clear and obvious, then I think we'll see a lot more growth in the diversity of the organization. So it's great to be welcoming, but once people are in the door, then they need to know what's the next thing. So I'm here, I feel good, these are nice people, but now what do I do? And so it's just not enough to be a welcoming society. We have to also be very intentional about those pathways.
Thank you so much. So where to from here? So first of all, we just want to share a few references with you so you can have a look there if there are some further readings that you'd like to take a look at, as well as share with you how you can get a hold of us through our email addresses there. And I just want to take a minute to thank everyone who attended the panel for inviting me to come along to this panel. This is early in the morning in Australia. It's only 8 in the morning, and I have to say it's a great way to wake up. I feel really invigorated and excited about moving forward in my day, and hopefully those of you who are listening to this discussion feel the same way. This particular group of folk come to you from the Advocacy Committee, which is one of the committees in the ISSOTL organization. If you are interested in joining our committee of lively and enthusiastic and committed individuals, we would love to have you join us. If you'd like to know more about the Advocacy Committee, there's our Gmail address at the bottom of that slide that you're more than welcome to reach out to us and say, hey, I was at this presentation and I'd like to know more about your committee. So at this point in the conversation, what we'd like to do is turn it over to you. And we're going to stop the recording. And like I said, some of us will be now there live to continue this discussion with you. And we'd like to know from you, do you have any questions that came up for you during the panel discussion that we might be able to answer? Do you have some comments or ideas that you would like to add to what you've heard today? And in what ways do you think that we can leverage our collective knowledge to provide a basis for reaching more inclusive and a more diverse ISSOTL society as we move forward from here? So from the panel, we'd just like to say thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Maybe we'll all just wave goodbye and we look forward to hearing what you all have to say in your time at the conference. So enjoy the conference, enjoy the fruitful discussion, and thank you so much. That's all from us.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you being here. And we'd like to just start off, open the conversation up. Any thoughts, any comments, questions? I saw Nancy had a great comment in the chat about whether or not there was a SoTL at the HBCUs, which I thought was a really nice comment about the fact, of where is that? It's a real gap in our literature. So I think that that's, we're looking at really doing some really proactive, what are the things we can do? Yes, that was the recording, and now, this is the live chat. Earl, Miles, Hillary and I are here live to take your questions, either live or in the chat.
Nancy's hands is raised, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm so sorry I was late. I shouldn't ask a question since I was late, so you probably already talked about things. But I did hear Mills's important comment about language. And, we're an international society, but we're really an English-only international society. And I remember a few years ago in the before times, Mills, when you first raised that, or I should say, when I first heard you raising that, you had probably been talking about it before then. But that's really stuck with me since then. It's a hard one, but I have to say, like I put in the chat, ISSOTL, their conference, I don't know what platform they used, but it had immediate translation, subtitles at the bottom, and they weren't perfect, but they worked. I think part of the challenge in the past and still is okay, so how do we do that? And that ISSOTL conference illustrated one possible way. I know that when I first heard this, I was really like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how we would do that, where we have the capacity. But I think we're starting to see potential ways forward for doing that. Yeah, so I don't really have, I do have a question. In addition to something like ISSOTL with the subtitles on the screen, in addition to Mills, what you mentioned about paying interpreters for articles, what are some other ways that we can, as a society, reach beyond the English language?
So
that's a great question.
Yeah, I'll just say that at the ISSoTL in Bilbao, not every panel was translated. All the plenaries were translated, and so that was 5 sessions, and then they had, I think, maybe 6 to 10 additional panels that they knew because of the subject matter or because of who was presenting that they would probably have larger audiences, and so those were all simultaneously translated, into the 3 languages were English, Spanish, and Basque, and so they were simultaneously translating, and this always seems hard for us in North America because we don't do it, and it doesn't seem complicated in the European Union because it's what they do. And so, it's also, I will say, easier in the European Union because there are lots more people who can do simultaneous translation there, and so the logistics are a little easier. But we can certainly be more non-English in at our conferences just for the plenaries, for instance. And so that keeps the cost down and the logistics simpler, but it's a start.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep.
Nancy, sorry on your point, and I love the way you actually raised these really important questions. I was at an event a week ago, and when I joined, it was all online. I had a welcome. So for me, it makes me think about how we become a personalized SoTL. And it asks me what language I want to be or I want to engage with. And there's a whole list. And it said very clearly at the bottom, we may not be able to accommodate every language, but at the same time, they put me in touch with groups of people who spoke the same language. So possibly a way forward is that we may not be able to do it all, but we can do it in part if we start to rethink how we could possibly make SoTL more a personalized journey in moving forward, which then begs a question. Could tech in the future help to close the SoTL gap? And is that the way to think?
It sounds like the language gap is one area where there could be some real improvement, even if we, even if in small incremental steps of thinking about it. I do remember one time having one of the people who was presenting in one of the conferences was a deaf person, and so there was signing being done for that session. So, I think that we have capacity. We just have to figure out how to make it work. And I think Earl's point about being able to help use technology to help us would be good. Go ahead.
I see a hand raised.
Yeah.
Gail has her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, it's me. Well, I wonder if one of the and this is a little bit like similar to something that's been mentioned, but one of the ways to think about being inclusive, a lot of different, internationally, that is, a lot of places have their own SoTL communities. They may or may not exactly call themselves SoTL, but close. And so I wonder if, it makes me think about how ISSOTL is a kind of consortium of academic developers in a lot of different countries and continents. And would it be productive for ISSOTL, instead of saying, we're international, so why don't you come into our tent, to try to create partnerships with organizations that host conferences in other countries that are in other languages? Right? I know in Europe, that in Central Europe, there are different kind of local, Germany has its own thing. And so I just think that maybe creating, for example, a joint seminar, you know what I mean? Instead of hanging everything on the main conference, there could be other ways to build those relationships strategically, bit by bit, rather than sort of this question, which I think it's not exactly what's being said here, but I think is a very common and sort of white North American way of approaching it, which is oh, we want to include you at our table, why aren't you coming? Right? So thinking more how can we reach out to where people already have their own conversations going on? So maybe they don't feel a need to engage in our conversations, but if we're curious about their conversations and are thinking, how can we connect with you so we can share across these spaces, then that might be a fruitful way to do it.
I'm going to wait to see. Is there a response on that?
Yeah, I'm did I stun everyone into silence?
No, I was just thinking about that because when I was the president, ISSOTL president, we had, outreach from a couple of different other international societies doing SoTL things, and but we had kind of a hard time figuring out exactly how we were going to collaborate. In one case, they just wanted us to buy a table at their in their vendor area, which was not really collaborative. But the other thing is there are these, so the Latin SoTL folks who I mentioned in the recording, they're very anxious to be part of ISSOTL, and and of course all this happened just before COVID hit, and also the organizer of Latin SoTL is at a university in Chile, which underwent tremendous upheaval just before COVID, and so they kind of got knocked off their track a little bit, but they're really anxious to be part of our organization as an affiliate, not, I mean, they want to be members of ISSOTL, but they want to be an affiliated society at the same time. And there's just tremendous enthusiasm across South America for this. But we would have to do things in Spanish. Oh my God. Not to mention Portuguese.
Yeah, you still have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
No, that was just an old hand.
Okay. It's interesting. One of the things that we did in the Advocacy Committee recently was started putting together a list of all the organizations that are SoTL or SoTL-like, so that we would just have sort of in one place all of those as a reference. And I think it's very incomplete, but I really like this idea of the affiliation. So I'm wondering how we can actually support that and move that forward.
I think we actually said at the meeting to reach out and make those links. We need to reach in first. So we need to sort out from an internal point of view how we're planning on shaping it. And I think it is about reach, and it is about thinking about ways of being and doing, and different ways of doing, and multiple voices. As Mills said and the whole panel said, we tend to hear the same voices. But what does SoTL, what is the vision of SoTL in different worlds? What does it look like? And do people see themselves as part of SoTL? Which I think is the importance. So if you feel you're part of SoTL, you'll grow with SoTL. But if you feel that you're apart from it, you grow apart from it. And it's how do we bring those worlds together? And that's about sharing. So maybe the future is about the tweets that we put out there, the messaging of SoTL.
Thank you. I'm trying to. There's something that really. I don't really know how to say this correctly, but I'm just going to kind of plunge in here. So this idea of the language piece is really intriguing to me. And I know that is there a way that we can piggyback on that idea in terms of, like, in a way, pulling the language and the affiliation parts together in some way? So what I'm thinking is, I remember Michelle was saying that she had done some work with the Japanese SoTL group, and that, they had done some work there too. And hearing this mention about, China and some of these different things. But again, it's like we've said it, but how does it show up for us in terms of actual doing, I guess? Sarah.
So I don't have a great answer to that, but I think it's a great question, Diana. And I think it ties back to Yael's challenge of saying, why don't you all want to play with us? Yeah. And I think that's been a conversation that we've had on the board for a number of years about outreach and how do we bring scholars from other areas that aren't currently represented into the ISSOTL sphere. And part of what Nancy has really pushed us to do over the last couple of years is to be very transparent about processes and documentation to create an invitational pathway so that it isn't an invitation with nowhere to go, but actually clear guidance about how do you navigate ISSOTL opportunities and make connections. And so as we think about the question around affiliates, what is the benefit? What is the bidirectional benefit of affiliation with ISSOTL other than us looking more ISSOTL, right? How do we actually make that meaningful? How do we learn from and with, and what happens in that middle space through that collaboration? So I think there's a real opportunity for articulating what could happen there, and how do we be transparent about that in a way that's intentional.
So I believe one of the things that is going to be happening with the with the writing groups is that there'll be one writing group will be on public scholarship, and then the next time it'll be on the more traditional writing groups, I guess. But I think that that's one of the ways in which the fellows were thought to be able to bring some sort of steam into this movement. Let's see that. Yeah. So I think that we mentioned the fact, or Michelle mentioned the fact that we have the book coming out about about public scholarship, and I think that that will also be really helpful. And it looks like it is 10 minutes of 3. Is that our official time?
Yes, Diana, I was going to give somebody the last word. If you need to go to another session, you may, but please join me in thanking this panel for a really interesting conversation. You can put a note in the in the questions, virtually clap, whatever you would like to do. I will stay in this room for a couple more minutes if some of you want to wrap up your conversation, so I will not kick you out, but probably for just about another 4 to 5 minutes. And once everybody leaves, I will officially end the meeting.
Thank you all so much for coming, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, panel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.